we have a Spanish interpreter available named Frida. I'm going to pass it over to Frida now to explain how to access interpretation.
Thank you, Ariel. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this session. My name is Frida, and I'll be your interpreter. Muy buenas tardes a todos y bienvenidos a esta sesión. Mi nombre es Frida y seré su intérprete. I'll give this message both in English and in Spanish. Daré este mensaje tanto en inglés como en español. In order to provide language access, this meeting will have simultaneous bidirectional interpretation in English and Spanish. If you're bilingual, you don't have to click anything. But if you're not bilingual and you're using your laptop, please locate the icon shaped like a globe at the bottom of your screen, click on language interpretation, and then select English. If you're using your phone or an iPad, then locate the three-dot menu in one of the corners of your device, click on language interpretation, and then select English. When you speak, do so at a moderate pace because the interpreter is going to be simultaneously interpreting everything you say. A efecto de proporcionar acceso lingüístico, esta reunión contará con interpretación simultánea al inglés y al español. Si usted es bilingüe, no tiene que presionar nada, pero si usted no es bilingüe y está en su computadora, encuentra el icono en forma de globo en la parte inferior de su pantalla, haga clic en interpretación de idiomas y después seleccione español o Spanish. Si está usando su iPad o su teléfono, entonces localice el menú de 3 puntos o que dice More en una de las esquinas de su dispositivo, haga clic en interpretación de idiomas y después seleccione español o Spanish. Cuando hable, hágalo en español. El intérprete estará simultáneamente interpretando todo lo que diga. Gracias. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Frida. All right, on to some additional logistics on how to participate. First, I want to set the tone here that tonight's workshop is meant to be interactive. So if you have any questions or comments throughout the workshop, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and staff will be monitoring and responding to the Q&A as we go. If you do prefer to verbalize your comments, we'll have space for that as well. At the end of the meeting, we will have a public comment period where we will first respond to any questions or comments that were submitted throughout the presentation and not answered immediately, and then you'll have a chance to call in or unmute yourself and let your voice be heard. The next few slides will show us all how to access and use the Q&A feature. In addition to the Q&A, we will also be using the polling platform called Poll Everywhere to solicit your input. Instructions on how to use that platform will be provided momentarily. If you're viewing the meeting on a computer, you can find the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. If you did not have a chance to introduce yourself earlier, please feel free to do so now to test that feature. As previously mentioned, we will also have an opportunity for you to give comments and ask questions verbally if you prefer. When the time comes, if you would like to speak, please use the raise hand function and the reactions menu at the bottom. And also please be aware that Frida, our interpreter, needs you to talk slowly so she can properly interpret. When it is your turn to speak, you can unmute yourself to speak your comment. On the next slide is how you can find the chat and raise hand features on your mobile or smart device if that's how you're joining us this evening. Click on the More button located at the bottom of the Zoom window, then click on the chat window to send your comments and questions. Again, I am Ariel. With me tonight is Chad, Claire, Julia, Kelly, and Megan, who are also from the county. Claire and Megan will also be presenting while Chad, Kelly, and Julia will be making the magic work behind the scenes. You may see their names pop up in the Q&A. On this slide, we have a simple agenda for tonight's workshop. Last summer, we asked you to submit feedback to help inform the draft vision of an equitable net zero emissions future in each of the climate plan or CAP emission sectors. Tonight, we're going to talk about the draft vision statement for the agriculture and conservation sector, along with the draft strategies and measures to reach that vision. We'll host one more workshop later in the summer to cover the built environment and transportation emissions sector. We hope to see you there too. Tonight, our main objective is to share with you our current progress and receive additional feedback through our polling questions and a live discussion forum at the end. Now I'm going to hand it off to Claire, who will get more into the details of why we're here this evening.
Thank you, Ariel. Good evening, everyone. My name is Claire Moss. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge the role that agriculture plays in the county. More than 5,000 farmers call the county their home and make their living on 250,000 acres. We have more small farms defined as less than 10 acres than any other county. We are the 19th largest farm economy among more than 3,000 counties. And let's not forget the very serious barriers to entry. The high cost of water and land make farming here expensive, and San Diego farms have specialized in integrating agricultural activity and urban living, growing crops that optimize limited acres. So now that we know a little bit more about our agricultural community, I would also like to acknowledge that some folks might be brand new to the process, and some others might have been part of the CAP update for longer than I have. So let's set a common goal for us this evening. We are all here to discuss how we can collectively reduce greenhouse gas emissions through agriculture and conservation measure development, because the county is faced with challenges of climate change, and so are farmers. There are available strategies and measures that can contribute to climate change or contribute to climate change goals while supporting agricultural and conservation in the area. So long as we can agree to that, we have a platform for discussion. So let's get started. In order to receive feedback from you, we will use Poll Everywhere to help facilitate some questions. So to participate in the polls, you can either use the link that's going to be provided in the chat, or you can scan the QR code on the left-hand side of the screen with your smartphone's camera, or you can type pollev, that's pollev.com/SDCoSustainable681 in your browser. Once you do so, you will be redirected to the event automatically. I will give everyone a couple of moments to get logged on. If you have any trouble whatsoever, please let us know within the Q&A or chat, and someone from the team will assist you. The first round of poll questions are just going to give us a chance to better get to know you. So I'll give everyone a couple of seconds. Again, you can either use the link in the chat, scan the QR code, or you can type in pollev.com/SDCoSustainable681 into your browser. We'll give it just a minute. All right, let's get started. So the first question we have is, welcome. What brought you here today? Maybe you're here because of work. Maybe you're here because you're an interested resident. Maybe you work in agriculture or conservation. Let us know what brought you here today. Interested in preserving agricultural lands? Great. Here for information due to my work and role? Fantastic. Staying up to date on the decarb plan? Agricultural interest? Concern over the future? And just as an FYI, so this is about the climate action plan, but we will mention very briefly the regional decarbonization framework plan in a little while. Concern over the future, working in the ag sector. As a farm advisor, I'm excited to share how agricultural lands can be a huge asset for carbon sequestration. I'm a resident and I'm interested in conservation, agricultural interest as a resident, interested in revitalizing soil and learning more about agriculture in San Diego, nature enthusiast. I'm a rancher and interested in what the plans are in the county as it relates to ranchers. Someone works in environmental policy, habitat conservation. Fantastic. Keep them coming, and we'll keep on this slide just a little bit longer, and then we'll go on to our next question. I'm interested in environmental issues and preserving agricultural land and other open space, very concerned about the climate crisis, concerned about agriculturally zoned areas accommodating industrial agriculture and converting the areas to unsuitable quality of life. Awesome, thank you. Belong to Fallbrook Climate Action Team and want to stay up to date on the CAP. Also an avocado producer, want to know what we can do. Great, I'm so happy to have all of you here. All right, let's go on to the next question. All right, this is an opportunity for us to get to know a little bit better about who's in the audience. So let us know who you are. Are you a resident of the unincorporated county? Are you a resident of the incorporated cities? Are you an agricultural professional, county employee? Maybe you're a community-based organization, CBO representative. A lot of folks seem to be residents of the unincorporated county. Awesome. This is just a way for us to know who we're talking to, see who's interested. Some county employees. All right, primarily residents of the unincorporated county. Awesome. Thank you for attending. All right, let's move on to the presentation, shall we? Okay, so thank you again for sharing a bit about yourselves. Now we'd like to share a bit about the CAP update so you can understand where we are within the process. The CAP update is a multi-objective plan that balances environmental, economic, and community interests. It implements the county's general plan and it aligns with multiple county initiatives. The plan's main goal is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, which are the cause of climate change and the result of many of our regular activities. The plan aims to meet state targets and achieve a net zero carbon emissions goal by 2035 to 2045, which essentially means that we are removing as many emissions as we are producing. But the CAP update isn't just about climate change. It's also about quality of life. It's about people and communities. It's about our neighborhoods, our parks, our daily trips and errands, our energy and water use, and the waste thrown in our trash bins. The actions the county will take to reduce greenhouse gas emissions also have the potential to improve lives. That means like planting more trees in parks, making it easier and safer to walk and ride a bicycle, making it easier to charge electric vehicles, planting drought-tolerant landscaping, retiring polluting vehicles, and reducing waste that ends up in our landfills. Now, last summer, we hosted a workshop series in which we covered where emissions in the county come from, and we asked participants about their vision for an equitable net zero emissions future as it pertains to the CAP's 5 sectors. We're going to mention them throughout, but I will give you a brief overview right now. So the CAP's 5 sectors are built environment and transportation, energy, water and wastewater, solid waste, and agriculture and conservation. So over the last few months, we have used your feedback to develop a draft vision statement for each of these 5 sectors. This vision guides the development of subsequent strategies, measures, and the actions that we will take. Our final stage of the feedback process will offer additional opportunities for you all as stakeholders to prioritize which approaches you want included within the CAP update. As we mentioned, tonight we are in the middle, how can we get there, strategy and measures phase. So the first step in the county's climate action planning process is to understand the sources and amounts of greenhouse gas emissions that are generated from activities within the county's unincorporated areas and county operations. The pie chart on the left-hand side is a breakdown of the different greenhouse gas producing sectors by how much emissions they produce. This is how we establish the different sectors. So you can see here that according to the 2014 inventory for the 2018 CAP, agriculture is responsible for 5% of the county's total greenhouse gas emissions. The CAP update seeks to address all emissions produced through a focus on those 5 main sectors. Again, solid waste, built environment transportation, water and wastewater, energy, and agriculture and conservation. Throughout the summer, we have and will continue to hold similar workshops for those other sectors of the CAP update. On the right-hand side of the screen, you're seeing a chart that indicates how the CAP is more or less structured. So first we start with that big vision statement. It's what we want to achieve. And then we identify strategies to get to that vision statement, the measures that we need to track to achieve those strategies, the specific implementing actions we need to pursue each of those measures, and the supporting efforts that can't be quantified, but nonetheless continue to contribute to achievement of those measures. So nice inverted triangle there. As a reminder, for those who were not with us at the workshop last summer, the chart on the slide shows the breakdown of the previously mentioned 5% of total county emissions associated with this sector. More specifically, agriculture and conservation emissions refer to emissions associated with livestock, application of fertilizer, and the use of petroleum and diesel powered equipment. Given that agriculture is a major contributor to the local economy, and similar to other sectors is being affected by the impacts of climate change, such as water supply and drought issues, it is especially important for us to understand where emissions are coming from and how the county can support agriculture to reduce emissions and provide complementary benefits, such as the creation of green jobs and programs that support sustainable farming practices. It is also important to point out that the 2014 emissions inventory looked specifically at emission sources from the agricultural sector and did not consider the potential role that this sector has in removing emissions from the atmosphere by sequestering carbon in plants and soil. The CAP update will look at sources of greenhouse gas emissions similar to the 2018 CAP, but it will also consider how agriculture and conservation land store carbon in soil, plants, and crops. Evaluating these emission sinks will help us to identify potential measures such as land management strategies and practices that can increase the amount of carbon captured and help the county meet its emission reduction goals. So let's get a better idea of the kinds of agricultural practices that generate those emissions. So first we have agricultural equipment. This would be off-road mobile agricultural equipment, both diesel and gasoline fueled. They contribute to greenhouse gas emissions from fuel combustion and fossil fuel powered engines. Then we have manure management. This refers to the stabilizing and storing of manure. So for example, manure is often disposed of in piles, slurries, or lagoons, which can lead to emissions of greenhouse gas, methane. Then we have enteric fermentation. Enteric fermentation is a natural part of the digestive process in ruminant animals, such as cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs. This is when microbes in the digestive tract or rumen decompose and ferment food, producing methane as a byproduct. Then we have soil management. Various management practices on agricultural soils can lead to increased availability of nitrogen in the soil and result in emissions of nitrous oxide. Specific activities that contribute to nitrous oxide emissions from agricultural lands include the application of synthetic and organic fertilizers, the growth of nitrogen-fixing crops such as purple owl's clover, the drainage of soils, and irrigation practices. And finally, we have diesel irrigation pumps, which is essentially the operation of diesel-fueled irrigation pumps, which generates emissions. Now, I want to say that although this slide focuses on agriculture emissions sources, again, I want to acknowledge that agriculture and conservation are in a unique position when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions. A number of agricultural and conservation practices actually solve some of our excess greenhouse gas problems by way of sequestering or storing carbon in the soil and plant matter. By utilizing improved land management practices, also known as carbon farming, by conserving more land and by planting more trees, the sector can actually serve as a carbon sink and reduce the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. So while we conducted all of our outreach last year, we heard a lot from you about agriculture and conservation. Of course, listing all of these comments that we've heard would make for a very, very busy slide or many, many slides. So please note that this slide is just indicative of high-level themes. Some of those themes that emerged are carbon farming and sequestration, energy use in agriculture, electrification, native and local practices, water-efficient agricultural practices, labor and environmental justice, and training and education. So from those themes, last summer's visioning workshop series and technical knowledge, we have created the following draft vision statement. As a reminder, the vision statements are intended to describe an ideal future where the county has achieved an equitable net zero emissions future in each of the sectors. The vision statement for agriculture and conservation reads, natural and agricultural lands are preserved to capture carbon, support the local food and farming community, and provide access to healthy outdoor spaces. I'll read that one more time. Natural and agricultural lands are preserved to capture carbon, support the local food and farming community, and provide access to healthy outdoor spaces. So we'll pause on this slide just for a moment. If you want to read it again, let it sink in. And then we'll move on to the next slide, and we're going to ask you what you think about the vision statement. So again, this vision statement is meant to be indicative of, the themes that we've heard, your feedback. So let it sink in, and we're going to ask you some questions about it. All right, let's move on to those questions. All right, so we want to know, did we get it right? Does the vision statement reflect your prior comments? And you can opt for yes, it does reflect your previous comments. Maybe we're almost there, maybe we're not quite there yet. Maybe it needs some more work. So let us know what you think. And if you think that we're almost there or we're not quite there, my next question is going to be why. So think about your reasoning too. Looks like so far about 50% of folks think that it does reflect some previous comments that have been made. About 30 people think that we're almost there. And then the remaining think that we're not quite there yet. All right, I think we've settled out just a little bit. So let's go on to the next question. For those of you who think we are not quite there yet or almost there, what else do you think should be included? How can we better showcase the feedback that you are providing? Is preserve the most appropriate word to use? We need to invest in and cultivate these landscapes to make sure they are thriving to their full potential. Thank you for that comment. Yeah, sometimes the verbs that we use and the implication of like what actions are happening is something that's really important to think about. So thank you for bringing that up. Wildlife and habitat connectivity needs to be included. Protection of habitat lands and open space for habitat and biological diversity, not only human access. Yeah, so maybe it needs to be less human-centered. Open space and wildlife land purchases, toughen up the hurdles for development on unincorporated lands, opportunities to innovate for more effectively addressing climate change. There needs to be specifics around that conserving and restoring natural lands such as canyons, open spaces, and wetlands, marshlands to sequester carbon, support biodiversity, and promote clean water. Healthy working lands optimize both biodiversity and food production. Prescribed grazing is an ideal example. Agricultural lands should not just be preserved, but actively promoted and directly supported. Plants that are considered carbon sinks should also be encouraged for cultivation. Must include restoration of previously degraded habitat areas. And I think I'm seeing some comments come through the chat as well. Thanks for including those. If anyone's having any trouble whatsoever with the poll everywhere, feel free to just include your comments in the Q&A or the chat. They will also be documented there. If you have not logged on to Poll Everywhere but would like to, we can relink the link if that's helpful. Should include language around educating and promoting seasonal eating and the consumption of less carbon intensive foods. Awesome. I'm gonna give everyone just a couple more moments just because I know that there were a number of people who thought we weren't quite there yet. We need to adapt our landscape management to new climatic conditions with more fire and less water. This transition will require investment. Wonderful. All right. I am now going to pass it off to my coworker, Megan, to talk a little bit more about strategies and measures. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Claire. Good evening, everyone. As Claire mentioned, my name is Megan Kelly, and I'll be discussing our draft strategies and measures for the agriculture and conservation sector. So as you just heard, our vision statement sets the overall direction for our net zero goal. And from there, our strategies provide a high-level approach for achieving that goal. Within these strategies, measures outline the specific actions that the county will take to get us to net zero. So while there are many ways that we could reduce greenhouse gas emissions, there are a few requirements that we must meet in order to include a measure within the county's climate action plan. So first, the county must have data to demonstrate and quantify the reduction over time. We must also have jurisdictional authority to enforce the action, and also the ability to monitor the reductions over time. CAP measures must also be additional to existing regulations, meaning that the action would not have otherwise occurred without the county's action. So the strategy, measures, and actions that we'll share this evening are still being workshopped. They're in draft form and are conceptual at this point. So your feedback can really help us shape what goes into the plan. Before we start getting into the details, we're going to move to another quick poll to learn more about why reducing emissions within this sector is important to you. So again, this is an open-ended poll. So if you can just, in the poll everywhere or within the poll or the Zoom chat function, you can just list out why you're here tonight, why reducing emissions within agriculture and conservation emission sector is important, if it's addressing any of the emission sources in particular that Claire went over previously, or if it's more general to your relationship with agriculture and conservation throughout the region. Still waiting on some responses here. Great. We love our county too, and recognize the importance that agriculture has within the economy and also the conservation of our really diverse and unique habitats that we have here. So some folks are interested in reducing emissions to slow and reverse the impacts of climate change, and recognizing the unique position that this sector has, especially when we're talking about carbon sequestration. Addressing sequestration through natural solutions because land conservation and biodiversity is important. That is something we are considering, especially as it relates to some of the co-benefits that we can see from land preservation and conservation as well, which we'll get into later on in this presentation. Yes, and recognizing that some of the biggest emitters from this agricultural community could be turned into a big resource where we see a big potential for seeing some of the climate solutions that we've seen, some best practices throughout the state of California and meeting climate targets. Some folks see ag as a key part of a broader conservation efforts, and there are various regional and sub-regional opportunities. That's right, there's a lot of work going on throughout the San Diego region within this sector on both land preservation and also some sustainable agricultural practices as well. So we have a great breadth and depth of resources available to us. So we're lucky on that front. Okay, I see responses slowing down. So I think we'll, oh, there's another one there popping up, but just feel free to continue providing responses through the poll. And then also through the chat function as well. So I think we'll move to the next slide and get into our draft measures. So within this sector, we have 3 strategies. The first strategy looks at ways the county can increase carbon sequestration. The second strategy addresses agricultural land preservation. And the third strategy considers how the county can support climate-friendly farming practices. So within this first strategy of increasing carbon sequestration, we'll cover 3 draft measures that increase sequestration through the conservation of open space and tree planting efforts. Supporting efforts for these measures could include the promotion of locally grown food and sustainable agricultural practices to conserve water, build soil health, and moderate soil temperatures during extreme heat days. So over the next few slides, we'll explore some specific measures that help us achieve this strategy. So the first draft measure is to open space conservation lands consistent with the current requirements of the county's Multiple Species Conservation Program, or MSCP, and future conservation efforts. The MSCP preserves the region's native habitats and wildlife for future generations by providing a framework for a region-wide conservation effort that balances streamlining building regulations and permit processes to support healthy community growth. Through 2018 CAP implementation, these efforts have conserved over 7,700 acres from 2015 through 2021. The second draft measure is to develop and implement a tree canopy assessment and program to plant trees within the unincorporated area with a priority for underserved communities. This measure could be achieved through several actions. We have a couple examples on this slide. They could be achieved by expanding the existing tree planting program that currently plants trees in county parks to include other areas, including the public right-of-way and other public land, and also by increasing the tree canopy on private property where possible through tree giveaway events, subsidizing costs, and bulk purchasing programs, among other efforts that increase tree canopy on private land as well. And the third draft measure within the sector is to, strategy, is to promote and prioritize tree preservation and green infrastructure in residential and non-residential development and in county projects. So here there's a number of ways to expand tree canopy cover in developed areas. And this could be through ordinance amendments to increase tree planting, tree preservation, and green infrastructure in developed areas. And this could be accomplished by identifying gray infrastructure, which some examples include hard man-made infrastructure like buildings and roads that could be replaced or supplemented with green infrastructure such as green roofs, rainwater harvesting systems, permeable pavements. And one example would be to do this through the county's capital improvement program. So we'll jump to a quick poll on this strategy and just ask if there are any other actions that the county could take to sequester carbon in similar ways or different ideas from the three that we presented in these three draft measures. So again, covering the three measures, the first was to acquire open space conservation lands. The second draft measure looks at developing and implementing a tree canopy assessment to increase the county's current tree planting efforts. And the third is looking at promote and prioritizing tree preservation and green infrastructure in private development and in county projects. So we see our first responses coming up now: building soil health and planting follow crops that incorporate into soil. We will be getting into some strategies that address that a bit later on, and the third strategy that looks at climate-friendly farming practices, but I appreciate you bringing that up here. So here we're looking at increasing carbon sequestration outside of agricultural land. So looking at some of the open space preserved, conserved areas, and then also through tree planting efforts. Having carbon sinks planted strategically throughout the county. And yes, an important note that whatever we do must be coordinated with water conservation and supply. And linking that to a comment we have in the chat as well, is considering how to incorporate the use of native plants through this effort as well. So native trees, when we're looking at where we can increase tree canopy, which is something we're working on as well, and we'll provide some details on that project later on and how you can get involved in that effort to increase the use of native plants. Looking at riparian restoration, that's right. There's some great greenhouse gas reduction benefits from riparian habitats and restoring those. not to mention all of the co-benefits that come from healthy riparian areas as well. Include restoration of natural lands in addition to acquisition. That's right. Some of the natural and working land strategies we're seeing coming from the state and other jurisdictions throughout California include preservation and restoration of those lands to bring them back to a healthier state, providing better habitat for our critters, and getting that added sequestration benefit as well. It's a good point. Prioritizing habitat health by keeping connectivity. All right. I see some stuff coming up in the chat as well, so we'll certainly review those and bring that into the fold as well. Okay, I think it's slowing down now, so we'll move on to the second strategy. Thank you. Okay, so for strategy number 2, with this strategy, we're looking at ways to preserve agricultural land. So the first draft measure within the strategy is to avoid conversion of agricultural lands to developed uses through the placement of easements. So this can be done through the implementation of the purchase of agricultural conservation easements, or PACE program, which promotes a long-term preservation of agriculture in the county. So under the PACE program, willing agricultural property owners are compensated for placing a perpetual easement on their property that limits future uses to agriculture. So to date, over 1,200 acres have been placed into easements under the PACE program. And this measure in the CAP update could also consider building partnerships with local organizations to develop an agricultural land trust that could potentially reach additional properties beyond the PACE program and provide technical services and support as well. Another way to preserve local agriculture is through the second draft measure you can see here. This measure aims to create a food sourcing strategy for county operations that prioritizes local, equitable, and sustainable food suppliers. So through this measure, the county could develop a policy that would prioritize local and sustainable food suppliers to source more than 10 million meals covered by the county per year. And those are our 2 draft measures within the strategy. So we'll jump into a poll to get some comments and feedback on those measures through the poll. And again, feel free to provide your responses in the chat or in your Q&A as well. So here we're asking how interested you are in these 2 actions, the purchase of agricultural easements and the food sourcing strategy for county food purchases. This one's an easier one. You just select how interested you are, and not surprisingly, everyone's quite interested. That's why you're joining us tonight. And I think it's moving around a bit, but it looks like we have, quite strong interest in these 2 measures, these 2 draft measures, with some folks that are not as interested. Maybe they're more interested in other strategies, or you can provide your additional comments into the chat to let us know why. I think we'll move on to our third strategy. So here, the third strategy within the sector looks at how the county could support climate-friendly farming practices. So we have a few draft measures within the sector. The first draft measure is to incentivize the use of feed additives and/or improve forage quality to reduce emissions from enteric fermentation. So this could, again, be achieved through multiple methods or actions, but here you can see a couple of draft actions that we're looking at include encouraging and incentivizing farmers to improve forage quality in pastures and encourage the use of feed additives such as seaweed, and there are other examples, which are shown to reduce methane enteric fermentation emissions by up to 90%. An additional action within this draft measure could include the identification of grant sources to fund demonstration projects with voluntary dairy or livestock operators. That would be the participants for that. The second draft measure within this strategy is to increase energy efficiency of agricultural operations through retrofits and equipment conversion. So this could be completed by using LED grow lights for floriculture, increasing energy efficiency on farms, and or incentivizing the use of renewable diesel for equipment such as bridge fuel, while zero emission alternatives are being brought to market. And then where feasible electric versions exist, incentivizing the replacement of gas and diesel powered mobile and stationary equipment with electric equipment and vehicles. The third draft measure within the strategy is to work with regional partners to develop a carbon farming program to incentivize the use of climate-friendly farming practices in local agriculture. This can be completed by, one example is developing a carbon farming program that could provide farmers and ranchers financial support and technical assistance in the planning, design, implementation, and monitoring of carbon farming practices. So these practices could include the use of carbon beneficial cropland, grazing, and orchard management techniques. That include, there are several, but some examples include compost application, cover cropping, conservation crop rotation, rotational grazing, or hedgerow planting. And again, bringing up, a previous draft measure we spoke about earlier, we could also consider expanding the PACE program by adding an option that would incentivize carbon farming practices on those properties that have participated in the PACE program. And finally, the last draft measure for the strategy is to work with regional partners to incentivize nutrient management techniques to reduce synthetic fertilizer use. So this could be completed by developing a program that would provide education, training, technical assistance, and financial and material resources such as plants, protective fencing, and temporary irrigation systems to farmers to incentivize the reduced use of synthetic fertilizers. So this work would leverage research and technical expertise from partners such as the University of California Agriculture and Natural Resources and the University of California Cooperative Extension to provide farmers and ranchers free educational workshops on carbon farming and climate smart agriculture to support these efforts. So here, moving on to another poll, of these 4 draft measures, we'd like you to select which one is most exciting to you. So all of these are aimed at supporting climate-friendly farming practices, but which one do you feel is most important or is most intriguing to you? So again, are you more focused on changing feed additives for enteric fermentation, addressing those emissions, looking at a carbon farming program, or more interested in energy efficiency, or looking at a reduction in the use of synthetic fertilizers? So I just need to zoom in here. It's a bit hard to see. It looks like we have, yep, majority of folks mostly interested in the carbon farming program, and there are quite a slew of options that program could consider. So looking forward to having a conversation or reading your input in the chat or the Q&A on what it is about the carbon farming program in particular that excites you the most. So I see the numbers dwindling down on the polls there. I think we'll hand it off now. Back to Ariel to close out our presentation before we move on to Q&A and discussion.
Thanks so much, Megan. So now that we have discussed draft measures and actions that we're considering for the ag and conservation sector, we want to better understand why these actions are important to you. We've seen a lot of sort of comments come up in the chat this evening that maybe aren't directly related to greenhouse gas emissions as being the main reason or interest for why you would like to support a measure or action. Instead, you might be interested in the complementary benefits that result from that activity. Also known as co-benefits, these are positive outcomes from actions that are not directly tied to climate change efforts. So for example, listed on the slide here are several different potential co-benefits. For the CAP update, we want to be sure to include measures that impact the co-benefits you all as stakeholders are most interested in. And we know that there's a lot of other potential co-benefits, especially as we talk about the agriculture and conservation sector. From the feedback we've heard so far, we attempted to identify why those activities might be of interest to you. For instance, when you said you wanted to buy back for gas farm and lawn equipment, a buyback program, we thought that might be important to you because it would improve air quality. When you said you're concerned about planting more trees in urban areas, we thought this might be because of larger community health concerns. When you said you're interested in training programs in organic land management, we thought this might be important to you because of opportunities to create green jobs. And lastly, when you said you'd like to see extra incentives for carbon farmed food sold in communities of concern, we thought this was because you want to promote environmental and social justice. Of course, each of these activities could have additional co-benefits beyond the ones listed here. But what we really want to know this evening is, are our assumptions correct? Are these the issues you are most concerned with or interested in impacting through the CAP update as it relates to ag and conservation? You thought we were done with Poll Everywhere, but we're going to ask you to toggle back to the Poll Everywhere so that you can let us know, given this list of co-benefits, which ones are most important to you. And with this question, you can select all that you're interested in. Obviously, conserving farmland for this evening's discussion makes a lot of sense as a top runner there. Also looks like improving community health is really important to folks on the call this evening, as well as conserving water, habitat, improving air quality. We're interested in doing it all, which is why we're trying to make the best measures possible. It's great. So water conservation is definitely a topic that came up previously in the chat this evening as well. And it's something we're definitely taking into consideration. All right. Well, it looks like there's interest in all of the co-benefits, but some are ranking higher than others. Why don't we move on to the next poll question, please? In addition to co-benefits, what other criteria is important to you when we're evaluating our measures? In other words, what are other factors that we should be taking into consideration when developing and prioritizing the actions the county takes? And for this question, you can rank the list of criteria. So you can rank them in order of which ones you think we should be considering. There we go. So reducing greenhouse gas emissions quickly is at the top of the list because we all know action is needed now. And it looks like co-benefits and supporting equity and environmental justice, which could also be considered a co-benefit. then reducing costs to residents and businesses, and finally saving taxpayer money. This is a get it done group. And Laura, we can resubmit the link in the chat and see if that helps fix your issue. All right. Looks like we got our responses. Oh, co-benefits and quick action. And Laura will give you a moment to be able to add your response as well. I know there's some comments happening in the Q&A also, and we will be coming up on time to ask those questions through raised hand feature if you'd prefer to verbalize instead of writing your questions out. Okay, Julia, I think we can go on to the next slide, please. So thank you for all the rich information provided for these questions and throughout the workshop. The feedback you share with us will help us make decisions about how to develop the CAP update, what to include, and our goal is to incorporate public feedback and considerations for equity and co-benefits as much as possible. We'll also weigh other concerns, including fiscal, technological, and legal constraints. For example, as we shared earlier, we are required to quantify, enforce, and monitor greenhouse gas reductions, which unfortunately can limit what is possible. But that means the content we discussed tonight will not necessarily be what's in the final plan, but we're continuing to iterate and use the information we receive here this evening to improve upon our draft measures. Our next steps are to work within the county to further develop the conceptual measures. Then we will evaluate the measures to see how much greenhouse gases they can reduce. And we'll then have a better understanding of what can really help us reduce greenhouse gas emissions. At which point we'll return to you all for more feedback to help build out our draft measures. Ultimately, the board will have approval authority of the CAP update and will decide what the final plan includes. Now I'll hand it back to Megan, who will facilitate our question and answer portion of the meeting.
Thank you, Ariel. So now we've arrived at the public comment and Q&A portion of the workshop. So just want to leave open the rest of our time here to hear more feedback from you in addition to what we've already heard in the chat and the polls and through the Q&A. But first, before we get started, I just want to reiterate our team's thanks for everyone for taking the time to attend our workshop tonight. Just wanted to let you know that all of this feedback we have received thus far and what we'll receive, through this portion of the workshop will help us craft the CAP update. So please do make sure that you've signed up for our email updates using the website address shown on the slide. We'll also put it in the chat as well and provide it later on in the presentation before we close out as well. If you sign up for email updates, you'll receive the latest project information direct to your email inbox. And now for the Q&A portion, we'll start by addressing some of the comments we've received during the presentation so far. Feel free to add any additional questions in the Q&A box as well. I'm just checking that now to see if there's any open. So there are no questions here. We'll continue to monitor the Q&A as well throughout this portion of the presentation. But I think we'll just move into open public comment now. So we'll provide some instructions for providing open public comment. If you're joining us by phone tonight, you can see the instructions here. Well, you can't see the instructions on the slide because you're joining us on by phone. But if you're using the audio function on your phone and not on your computer, and you would like to provide any verbal comments, you press *9 to indicate that you would like to speak, and we'll see that you'd like to speak, and we'll call on you when it's your turn based on the last 4 digits of the phone number that you're calling from. And you'll just listen for the message that the host would like to unmute your microphone. And at that point, you can press *6 to unmute. When you're done with your comment, you can then press *6 again to remute yourself. So for those of you participating on Zoom on your computers, here you can see some instructions on the slide. From your mobile or smart device, just look for the raise hand function button at the bottom of the screen to let us know that you would like to speak. And when it's your turn, you'll receive a notification that you can unmute yourself, and then you'll be able to speak. And we'll mute you again if you need some assistance after you've done speaking. So I think I see some hands raised. Just a moment, everyone. Here we go. Sorry, getting my settings going. So I think we have Ellen first up. If you'd like to unmute yourself. And provide your comment. Ellen Bartlett.
Sorry, I did want to make a comment. I don't know how, I didn't notice my thing was off. Thank you.
Yeah, feel free to make your comment now and we can, answer any questions, or if you just want to make your comment. Okay, I think we'll move on to Pamela. Pamela Nelson, you have your hand up if you'd like to speak.
Yes, thank you. You may have seen in the question and answer, I'm very worried about industrial scaled agriculture changing the rural communities, in the small farming atmosphere. I've seen this happen over in Riverside County, where a whole community and valley was pretty much taken over by acres and acres of greenhouses, which mainly contain potted plants. And the whole sort of atmosphere is semi-trucks going all through the dirt roads and making, it impossible for equestrians and hikers and just the small farms to exist without smelling and being inundated by, the pesticide smell. And in other words, it just takes over the whole rural community. So how is San Diego County regulating that sort of thing from happening?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different issues you brought up there with that comment. So through the climate action plan, we, through this sector specifically, doesn't include the emissions included in the inventory for agriculture and conservation would not include the mobile sources. So from the trucking, I think I saw a comment from you earlier come through in the chat. So any emission reductions that would look at the transportation of goods from properties like that would be addressed through a separate sector, built environment and transportation, which will be the subject of our next workshop. So I invite you to join us for that, to look at ways to reduce emissions from the transportation sources related to all sectors of the economy, including agriculture. But then to address, the types of ag that we see in the community, we have quite a diverse agricultural community within the county, and floriculture is part of that and a big part of that. And any land use changes that would come through to establish new agricultural operations would go through our permitting and development process, which has all of the project review requirements that projects would go through that process. So within the CAPT update itself, we would look at ways to address new operations, or really the existing ones, and emissions reductions through the agriculture communities there.
Is there any, oh,
Yeah, go ahead, Pamela.
am I, well, I'm thinking also of the conversion of a rural community to an industrial community, you know, due to the large scale of some of the types of ag. That's kind of where I'm going to also, you know, by, you know, changing the whole community from, say, small farms and hobby farms to that type of environment. So there's no scale or some sort of a permitting that would be able to look at different zoned areas, or maybe valuable agricultural areas that wouldn't accommodate the industrial type of ag as well.
Right. Yeah. So again, you know, the cap is mitigation for the county's general plan, which it's through the general plan and that land use document that dictates the types of agricultural uses that are permitted through the zoning ordinance. So it's through a separate process outside of the cap to decide, you know, how land is being used per the county's general plan. But, you know, ways that we can look at how we preserve community character through the cap update would look at how we can incentivize, you know, the climate friendly farming practices that we talked about earlier in the presentation, which does include, you know, supporting the smaller scale farming that provides this carbon sequestration benefits. So that those are the types of activities that we'd look at promoting through the implementation of the cap to preserve agricultural land and ensure that it is climate friendly as well.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm getting at is how can the cap promote that kind of a environment versus the industrial? Yes.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for your comment.
Thank you.
So I want to open it up here. Anyone else would like to raise their hand and speak? Sheffley, you have your hand up. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, but go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you. So my name is Shafali and I'm a student at SDSU, and I've realized that many people don't know how important the agricultural sector is and how important soil is to reverse impact of climate change. So I just wanted to emphasize the importance of informing our community, our family members about the importance of soil in reversing impacts of climate change. So I just wanted to share an educational resource that you all can share with the community and look at yourself as well. So there's an organization called Conscious Planet that launched a movement back in March of this year called Save Soil, which aims to save soil from extinction by recommending policy changes to increase the organic content in soil to a minimum of 3 to 6%. And raise awareness among many people in order for these policies to be passed, including in the US, which will then trickle down and affect the San Diego community as well. Mayor Todd Gloria of San Diego has also proclaimed June 18th, which was the day of the Save Soil Walkathon in San Diego, as Save Soil Day as well. So I just wanted to share this educational resource. You guys can go to savesoil.org to learn more about the importance of soil in revitalizing soil health and in reversing impacts of climate change. You can also go to savesoil.org/webinar for a webinar that's going to be happening on July 21st for more information. So just a way to really inform our community about the importance of soil. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'm glad I hadn't heard of that webinar coming up in just a couple of days. So thank you for bringing it to our attention, and hopefully folks here can join in on that as well. Okay, just want to keep it open for a few more seconds if folks still want to raise their hand and chat. Yep, Joel, I see your hand up if you want to unmute yourself.
Hi, Megan. Thanks for having me here. And I really appreciate the county's openness to feedback and all the ways that you already support the agricultural and conservation communities. I have 2 points to make that I think could add to what you're talking about. Firstly, I really like the idea of focusing on existing programs like the PACE program to add value to it. So adding the carbon farming program to that makes a lot of sense. And so one way that the existing Healthy Soils program through the state is not fully able to meet its goals is it provides funding, but not the means to implement those practices. And so having equipment that's available to producers to get compost on the ground and mulch in their orchards to sequester carbon really efficiently would be a great way to scale that up. And secondly, I just want to value the existing sinks that agriculture provides and also in our natural spaces with chaparral and thinking about how we can lose a lot of that through fire and through drought. And so I'd like to encourage you to think about using prescribed burning as a tool to make sure that our burns aren't severe and that our chaparral and that are neighboring cultivated lands are protected. And looking at, rather than letting our orchards, because of drought and high water prices, go straight to fallow land, trying to keep that carbon sink by incentivizing a crop swap program. I'm sure Mission Conservation District can speak to that because they support something like that, but transitioning some of our subtropical orchards to high density or more Mediterranean crops rather than turning them into firewood because of business costs. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joel. I really appreciate your comments there and your participation tonight. Provide a lot of great content in the chat and Q&A, so really appreciate you joining us. Okay, I'm not seeing any more hands come up. Any last calls if you want to speak? We'll have a few more slides to share with you this evening where we'll give you our contact information as well if you feel more comfortable reaching out to us to have a phone call or a quick meeting. More than happy to do that as well. Okay. No more hands coming up, so I think we'll move on. So just as we begin to wrap up this evening, we'd like to really reiterate that the county is committed to equity and robust engagement in all of our work. And your participation and feedback here will help us inform and our approach to the CAP update. So really, again, many thanks for you joining us and providing all of your great feedback tonight. So here on this slide, you can see some ways to stay involved in this project, the CAP update, and share your feedback. We invite everyone to contact us with any questions or comments or to request a meeting to provide input as the project progresses. So we have the contact info here listed on the slide. You'll see it put up in the chat as well. And then next slide, please. So, you know, as we mentioned, this workshop is being recorded. You'll find the recording of the workshop on our website in about 2 weeks' time. It takes a bit of time for us to process it and get posted up on YouTube. And also, if you do sign up for email updates, or if you're already signed up, you'll get a notification for our upcoming workshop, which will focus on the built environment and transportation sector. So we'll announce the date for this upcoming workshop soon. It'll be later this summer. And then before we leave, we have a few more projects that we feel this audience may be interested in learning more about. So as some of you may already know, the county is currently developing the Regional Decarbonization Framework, or RDF. And this project will provide a roadmap to decarbonize the major carbon emitting systems such as the energy grid, transportation network, and energy use in buildings. And this is a regional plan that looks at the entire region, whereas the CAP update looks at county operations and the unincorporated area. So the plan is larger in scope than the CAP, but ultimately it'll provide guidance to local jurisdictions, including the county, and unincorporated cities to help achieve zero carbon emissions. So this plan is currently under development, and county staff have been reviewing updates to see if there are areas where the county can lead by example. So to help with early implementation of the RDF And to support future CAP efforts, the county will be asking for direction from our Board of Supervisors on a few items at an upcoming hearing that will take place on August 31st, so the end of next month. So two of the items related to this agriculture and conservation sector are included in this hearing, and you can see these two items on the slide here. They include first, direction that we're seeking on an equity-driven tree planting program. And here we're talking about a program to identify priority sites for tree planting in unincorporated communities with a focus on underserved areas. And this program would look to reduce the urban heat island effect, increase resiliency, and of course, reduce greenhouse gas emissions through carbon sequestration, which we've discussed in detail during this presentation tonight. So the second program we're seeking direction from the board on is a pilot carbon farming program. So this program would help us to better understand the potential for carbon farming in the county of San Diego. So please feel free to tune in to the August 31st board hearing to hear more about these efforts. We'll provide a link in the chat where you can find that meeting when it takes place on the morning of August 31st. But if you're interested to learn more before that date, please just feel free to reach out to us on the CAP update team, and we can provide you the context and any additional detail you may need before the hearing. So in addition to this upcoming board action, there are some other projects that are happening within our sustainability planning division that you may also find interesting. So we have 4 different projects here on the slide. The first is the Organic Materials Ordinance Update, which aims to simplify and expand access to composting in the unincorporated county. The second project is our Native Plant Landscaping Policy Options Project. And here we're looking at ways the counties can influence and encourage the use of native plants in private and public property. The third on this slide on the bottom left corner is our Accelerate to Zero initiative, which is a collaborative effort with other jurisdictions and agencies in the region to develop regional strategies to increase infrastructure for zero emission vehicles. And finally, our Sustainable Land Use Framework project, where we're reevaluating all of our county programs and initiatives to best achieve our transportation and climate goals. So again, if you're interested in learning about any of these projects or others we've mentioned previously, please just let us know through the Q&A or by emailing us at cap@sdcounty.ca.gov, and we'll get in touch with the staff leads to give you more details on those projects. So we'll just close it out here. This is our final slide for this evening, but before we break, I just really want to thank our interpreter, Frida, again, for all of your help this evening. She's been furiously interpreting all of this technical information and doing it well, and really appreciate her efforts for our Spanish speakers in the audience tonight. And again, thank you to everyone who's joined us for your participation in the polls, for attending and listening to us this evening, and providing all of your really important content and feedback in the Q&A and chat function. So again, please sign up for future updates on our project. We'll be announcing the workshop presentation date for our Built Environment and Transportation workshop, which will be the next one in this series soon. So sign up for updates and you'll get that notification when we release the date. So we'll close it out now. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us, and we'll see you again soon in the future. Thank you.